wind has become a symbol that we're doing something. Bill McKibben was invited to speak at the State House, and he said, every turn of the blade means that fossil fuels somewhere are not being used. Well, the issue that has interested me the most about this topic in the 9 years that I've been working on it is, are wind turbines really saving the planet?
Vermont has a number of renewable resources at its disposal that it can use to meet both its renewable energy goals, our renewable energy goals of 90% by 2050, but also just our commitment, our need to act on climate change and transitioning away from fossil fuels. The two most positive and possible resources for Vermont are wind and solar. We've got a good wind resource here in Vermont that can help us bring more of our energy in-state. And we really can't afford, in the time that we're living in, to turn our back on any renewable resource that we have.
Well, I think it was sometime in 2010, maybe late 2009, but around that time when I became informed about the project, and in that iteration of it. Industrial wind projects had kind of come to the area before but been rejected. And there were some students who were very impassioned about it at the time. And the Lowell Mountain Ridge Line is one that historically Sterling College has used for our winter expedition. For almost 30 years we've hiked across that ridge line with our new students in the winter. And so we had the whole community had a really strong attachment to it. So people's ears pricked up. It's like, wait, what? Where?
Any project over time, it either gains support once people have seen what it looks like and what it means to their community and their region, or it can lose support. And wind projects went from being not terrible, a lot of money for the community, to I think we're being used because we're the only place that they can put them and make money.
It's no accident where these wind projects are sited. The other day I was curious about the poorest towns in Vermont, and I found online a listing of 10 towns. Among the poorest towns in Vermont are Sheffield, Lowell, Searsburg, all three of which now have big wind turbines, Holland, which is the only active case going on right now, and there are 5 towns in the Northeast Kingdom, all in the remote area where Eolian proposed a big project. The only town that has not had a wind project proposed or operating of the top 10 poorest towns is Johnson Center. It's all about the money.
If we were to get to 25% of our power from wind, we would need about 126 more 3 megawatt turbines. We would need about 110,000 more 10 kilowatt turbines. And if you think that siting a Lowell-sized project is really hard, which you'd be right, it is, siting 100,000 10 kilowatt turbines around the state, I think that's impossible. I think that doesn't happen. So I say again, we need it all. We can't do it. We just simply can't get there with just small projects. We need the diversity. Diversity comes with other benefits. There's benefits in terms of resiliency and reliability of having power close to home and farther away, bigger power plants and smaller power plants. But in order to reach there, we do need the big ones as well.
And I think Shumlin was right on board with that and saying, yeah, we're tiny, but we're going to lead the country to, energy sustainability. Which I think is absurd. But yeah, like the whole idea of like us providing a moral example, I get that, but I also think it was rhetoric, and it was based on corporations making a lot of money through tax breaks, and I think it was driven by the capitalist economy, and we become, as citizens, I think we become, if we're not sophisticated enough in looking at where the dollar's coming from, and what the rhetoric and what's behind the rhetoric, we just fall for stuff. looks good, it's green, it's wind, there's no smoke coming out of that turbine, so it must be a good thing. But we're not asking the harder questions about, well, where is the coal plant that's going offline as a result of this?
Okay, so this is right here in Orleans County, Vermont. We have the impact of global economic policies, okay? And Green Mountain Power puts up, well, these other corporations give Green Mountain Power the money to put up to build this project, which is like $160 million. And the state of Vermont guarantees them a 10% return on that investment. Okay, so who else gets a 10% return on their investment? And who's paying for that 10% return on the investment? The ratepayers of the state of Vermont. Okay, so this has the effect of taking the wealth dispersion in this country and moving it to the 1%. You know, whenever somebody's getting a 10% return on investment and the economy is growing at 2 or 3%, they're sucking resources in that direction. Okay, and so this project, which is basically benefiting the corporations, has that effect. And then the way they market it, you know, they're selling renewable energy certificates to Connecticut. You know, so basically the effect of that is to add Connecticut's carbon liability to Vermont. So those are some of the distortions which really bother me.
Comes back again for me to saying yes to things. We are constantly at the table looking at proactive, positive policy solutions. We're an advocacy organization. We're always looking towards policy that can support our clean energy future in a sustainable and stable way. Time and time again, we're faced with simply no from particularly, you know, opponents of renewable energy. And if we saw a opening where there was a policy that was working towards our renewable energy goals, then we would be happy to have that discourse. But that's not been the case thus far.
Most of my closest friends in the village here, in the town, are opposed the projects. And so I've had many a discussion with them about the projects. And in the end, if you know they're still against it because they don't want to look at it, or because they moved here to get away from that type of thing, then there's nothing I can really say. If that's the way they feel and they don't like the project because they don't want to see any, you know, corporate development of the ridge lines, or they don't want it within their view shed, then I've really got nothing to say to them to counter that argument. The only thing I can tell them is, in my experience, which is really extensive in working on energy projects, we can displace those effects somewhere else, or if we choose to turn on our lights and our computers, we can live with some of those effects right here in our backyard.
I was up on the Lowell Mountains before they were destroyed, and it should have been a national park. It was, or at least a state park. It was one of the most extraordinary environments I've ever been in, with these beautiful rock outcroppings covered with moss, dripping with water. There were piles of moose shit everywhere. It had so much life, it had so much chi, there was so much going on there that was just, it was one wow after another, and it was cool. Even on a hot summer day, it was moist and wet. Well, now they have blasted roads wide enough for, in some places, as wide as an interstate, and because they were in a hurry to get it done to meet the production tax credit deadline, they, in testimony, said that they wanted it so that 2 trucks could pass. They're blasting away the entire peak. And we have before and after pictures of it that show now there's a road where there used to be one of the peaks of the mountains. This is a crime against nature, This is nothing that's an acceptable balance. And now what you have up there is hot, and it's dry, and it's not wet and moist, and it does not have the wildlife activity that it used to have.
I want to see the data that the wildlife has left, that the streams are dirtier, that the macroinvertebrates within the streams have changed, that the hydrology has changed, that the wetlands are impacted. You know, they impacted the one beaver pond in building the road, and they had to go back and do mitigation on that and fix it. And that was, you know, unfortunate that occurred. But in terms of ongoing, you know, impacts, show me the data. My concerns are greatly lessened by the fact that they gate the roads for these projects. I've just had vast experience on environmental issues and environmental review. In New Hampshire, there were no environmental laws. There's one: you can't build in water. So when I look at the things that we do to meet the requirements of a wind project and the hoops that we have to go through to ensure that there's minimal environmental impact, and I combine that with the fact that I'm using energy in my own home, it was a simple conclusion for me that alternative energy, even in my looking out my window, I can see it right there, is compatible with me being an ecologist and me being an energy user and me being a person who lives here in Lowell.
I think in the near term, there will not be wind built here until there's a major change. And I think that it will take a policy change, a rewriting of, you know, the wind sound rule, other various siting restrictions. We need wind in the state, so I sincerely hope, I pray that there is a future for it, but it's hard not to feel a little hopeless about it. What the immediate next steps are, I honestly don't know.
You don't have to be at odds and fight and you know. So to see the wind industry absolutely refusing to work in a collaborative manner has been so sad and really devastating for the people who are affected.